If you're trying to help your child lose weight, this is the most comprehensive video you will find that will help you do that. And you're going to want to watch it all the way through because this isn't just generic advice like moving more or eating less. It actually comes from personal experience, having overcome childhood obesity after 20 years of trial and error, and having helped thousands of families like you do the same. Hi, my name is Kami, and as a nutritional therapist specializing in children's weight loss, I speak with dozens of families every day who are desperately trying to help their child lose weight, and they usually come to me after having tried everything their pediatricians, dietitians, nutritionists, or even therapists tell them to do, but nothing seems to work in the long term. And I can feel the frustration that they have, and how their eyes light up when I share with them my perspective as someone who grew up with childhood obesity and personally seen how much my mom suffered trying to help me, and how much money she wasted trying all the different approaches that eventually led nowhere. And when I finally overcame my own obesity after 20 years of trial and error, I saw how fast childhood obesity is becoming worse across the world. If you didn't know, childhood obesity rates are almost doubling in the past 30 years, where about 20% of the kids in the US alone are now obese and 40% are overweight. And because of that, I left my career as an engineer and product manager working in large companies like Microsoft, where I was making a really good living, and I left all of that behind to build this company called Step Together, with a mission to help parents like you find a lasting solution for childhood obesity and avoid the decades of pain that my family and I went through. And at this point, I personally helped thousands of families who were exactly in your shoes overcome practically every challenge that you can imagine. So I decided to put all of that experience into this one video that covers the 13 most common root causes of childhood obesity that I see repeatedly when talking to parents during my consultations. And my goal is that this video gives you clarity, hope, and clear next steps on what you can do to help your child finally lose weight. And even though I have certifications in children's nutrition and physical fitness, I'm an engineer at heart, and I'm always looking for solutions that truly work repeatedly. And everything I'm sharing with you is backed with scientific evidence and the guidelines of the American Academy of Pediatrics for effective childhood weight loss. You can find all the reference links down below in the description. So let's get into the 13 most common root causes of childhood obesity. And I really recommend you watch the entire video because every section builds on the previous ones and there's truly unique advice that you'll find nowhere else. But if you want to skip to any section, I'll include timestamps and you can also find them on the YouTube time bar and in the description down below. So let's get straight into the most common root cause of childhood obesity that I see, which is your genetic predisposition to excess weight. And this is probably something you've heard before or suspected yourself, but no one really explains why genetics might be playing a role in your child's excess weight. And what I'm about to share might actually surprise you. If your child came out of the womb always craving food and they constantly want to eat, then what's likely happening is that their brain gets a lot more pleasure from food than another child would. And this is really something you can't control. This is also why some people are foodies, while others couldn't care less about food and just eat whatever is available to survive, or are actually really picky and only eat if something is really good, like pizza, for example. And this isn't pseudoscience either. There's actual studies where they've done fMRI scans on people's brains, and they see that one person can have significantly more dopamine signaling in their brain when eating food when compared to another person. And if you don't know what dopamine is, it's essentially a neurotransmitter or a chemical in your brain responsible for pleasure and motivation. And we'll be talking about it throughout this video. So essentially what this means is that two people can be eating the exact same chocolate bar and one person actually gets a lot more pleasure and happy chemicals in their brain from eating it than another person would, which makes that person a lot more prone to overconsumption and food addiction compared to any other substances. And this difference is actually very obvious when we look at other substances like alcohol, when one person can be drinking a little bit of alcohol and get hooked for life, and another person will just drink alcohol and go to sleep. And we really don't think about food the same way, but the exact same thing is happening. And if either parent really loves food and gets a lot of pleasure from eating, and maybe even struggled with excess weight when they were younger or throughout their life, then there's a high chance that one of the children will too. And the second reason why genetics plays a role is metabolism. And yes, we often hear people saying that they have a fast or a slow metabolism, but this is actually often dismissed and considered pseudoscience. And to be honest, I didn't really believe it made that much of a difference until I looked at the recent studies. And the results are actually surprising. Studies show that two children could look exactly the same, have the same exact physical activity level, but one child burns 600 calories more than the other. And this is actually caused by many factors, such as how much your body burns at rest, how effectively it can absorb calories from food, and how much non-activity movement they're doing, such as fidgeting, and many other reasons. these are all things that are generally outside of your control. And what's surprising is that a 600 calorie difference every day can lead to up to 60 pounds of weight gain over a year, even if two kids are eating the exact same food and doing the exact same exercise. Now, to be honest, in my work, I never see this rare of a difference, but even a 100 calorie difference every day leads to a 10-pound difference every year. But this compounds every year and can lead to where most parents meet me with their children being 50 or 100 pounds overweight in childhood or teenagehood. So all this to say that yes, genetics does play a role, and there are certainly things that are contributing to your child's excess weight that are outside of your control. And it's really important for you to know this, because sometimes parents see their kids eating the exact same food as another kid or even their siblings, but they seem to be gaining weight while the others don't. And genetics could actually be the reason why. And the unfortunate truth is, you just have to realize that your strategies as a family around food and exercise will have to be different than another family who doesn't have these challenges. Now, the second most common reason I see for excess weight in children is actually parents who are struggling to set a healthy example. And this isn't always the case, but most parents who come to me for help for their child are unfortunately struggling with their own excess weight, or they struggled with it in the past and have finally stabilized to a healthy weight after years of ups and downs, but are struggling to help their child do the same. And usually it's not both parents that struggle. Sometimes one parent has been in really good shape and has never had weight issues, while the other parent has struggled with excess weight their entire life. And my goal in pointing this out isn't to make you feel guilty, because as you'll see, if either of you struggled with excess weight, there's a high chance that it actually came from how your own parents handled their health and modeled it for you. And now there's actually a great opportunity for you to break that pattern so your child doesn't carry it forward. And to do that, you have to face this harsh truth. The advice that I'm sharing with you in this guide won't work for your child if you or your partner is struggling with excess weight, disordered eating, or is struggling to follow the same advice that you're giving your children. Because as you know, children don't do as you say, they do as you do. And unfortunately, children usually follow the path of least resistance. So they actually pick up on the most unhealthy habits of either parents. And I experienced this myself personally. No matter how much my mom was trying to teach me to eat better and exercise more, it didn't work because I saw that she herself was unfortunately struggling with excess eating and her weight her entire life. And in my mom's case, she was actually struggling with bulimia, meaning that she would often eat too much to calm her anxiety or out of boredom, then go to the bathroom to make herself throw up. And she actually even taught me how to make myself throw up when I was 13 and had eaten too much at a buffet, and I kept doing that for a long time after that. Now, it's rare that the parents I meet get to that extreme, but if you think you or your partner have unhealthy habits that you're struggling with, know that your child just unfortunately mirrors you. So if this is your case, instead of focusing on your child, you should redirect your focus on helping yourself as parents and trust that your child will model what you do. And to be honest, parents usually doubt me when I say this, but a month or two into the Step Together program, they are surprised to see that their children just naturally do what they do or eat what they eat, even without them having to say anything. And I know that modeling healthy behavior is easier said than done, and you have a lot of things going on in your life, especially if you've struggled with excess weight your entire life and the habits are really sunk in. This is actually why I created Step Together, to help parents overcome their own health challenges so that they can model consistent physical and mental health for their children and help them do the same. And yes, this program focuses primarily on parents, although children can be involved depending on their age. But I created this because I know this is what would have truly helped me as a kid. And trust me, my mom wasted tens of thousands of dollars putting me in a weight loss program like Jenny Craig, Weight Watchers. She got me physical trainers, dietitians, therapists. And as soon as I came back to my home environment and the program ended, all the weight came back every time. Here's an example of me having lost 60 pounds as a 14-year-old and gaining 80 pounds the year after. And I see parents every day repeating that mistake over and over, sending their kids to a weight loss camp, putting them on a restrictive diet like Jenny Craig or Octavia, hoping that they can get their child to change without changing their own parenting and environment. But trust me, I've seen thousands of cases like this, and it never works. Now, if you truly feel like both of you are healthy and are setting the right example, the third most common challenge that I see is actually inconsistency in parenting approaches, especially around food, exercise, and self-discipline. And here's a secret I'll share with you. About 95% of the consultation requests that I receive are actually from moms. And the sad truth is, most moms that I speak to don't actually feel comfortable bringing their husband, ex-husband, or other caretakers like the children's grandparents to the consultation. And they tell me that this is either because the other caretakers don't think it's a big deal, or that they'll just grow out of it, or the worst is that it's just mom overreacting and being emotional again. And so if this is your case, I really understand. My own mom didn't have the support of my dad when she was trying to help me, and she would often try to find help for me behind my dad's back. Meanwhile, my dad was really confident that I just needed more willpower, and he often used shame and guilt to try to make me stop eating or exercise more. And to be honest, it was a lot easier for him to say no to me for food. But it wasn't as easy for my mom to say no when I was asking for food, even though she was trying so hard to help me. And she often felt guilty and didn't want me to go hungry, and this is something I see all the time. Or she would often give me food to make me feel better when I was sad or emotional. And trust me, I knew exactly which of her buttons to press and would get really dramatic when I really wanted the food that I wanted, especially when it came to chocolate and dessert. So I grew up stuck between two parents who weren't on the same page, and this led to a lot of confusion because I didn't know whether food was something to feel guilty about or was a reward for good behavior or medicine when I was feeling sad or emotional. It's important to understand that this confusion and inconsistency in parenting is what usually leads to eating in hiding and lying about it. So if you've ever found wrappers or suspected that your child is eating more at school and lying about it, this might be the reason why. And unfortunately, if all caretakers aren't applying the same rules around foods and treats consistently, this can actually lead to increased cravings because your child grows up not knowing when they can expect their next reward. In psychology, this phenomenon is called intermittent reward, where your brain craves something much more and is willing to put much more effort in getting the next reward, which in this case is food, when it doesn't know when the next time it'll be rewarded. And if you didn't know, this is exactly how casinos work and get people hooked. So being consistent and on the same page as parents and grandparents, no matter what your strategy is, and having the same no's and yeses consistently to food and exercise is one of the most important things you can do to help your child reduce cravings and lose weight sustainably. And to be honest, this is also one of the things I help the most with at Step Together. A lot of my work is helping parents, split parents, and grandparents understand and apply consistent health strategies in their house long enough for their child to actually start losing weight. So if you think you need help with getting both you and your partner on the same page, whether you co-parent in the same house, split parent in different houses, or if you parent with a grandparent, I highly recommend that you book a free consultation with the link in the description in this video so I can help you with your unique situation. So if both parents are on the same page and are setting the right example for health, then the next most common case I see is children who have ADHD or symptoms of ADHD, who are struggling with excess weight as a direct cause of their symptoms and how it affects their brain and their food cravings. And this is something that even most psychiatrists don't know about, how directly ADHD symptoms lead to excess weight. In fact, about 4 out of 5 children who are in the Step Together program are diagnosed with ADHD. And it's really common that parents come to me in the program without any suspicion of ADHD for their kid and then go get it tested and see that it's actually true. And I'm not a psychiatrist, but this might also be your case. And if your child basically came out of the womb constantly craving food and wanting foods and snacks throughout the day, especially the sugary or carby kind, then this might be why. And trust me, I'm not saying that you should panic and get your child diagnosed if you think your child has ADHD. In fact, I grew up with undiagnosed ADHD and I didn't know it until I was an adult. And I'm thankful I didn't because I didn't know that there was anything wrong with me. But I really wish that my parents knew so that they could understand that when I was asking for seconds or thirds, asking for food right after having dinner, or just constantly begging for snacks, especially the sugary kind, it wasn't because I was hungry. It was simply because of what ADHD was doing to my brain. Now, there are many things that cause ADHD, and a good psychiatrist will actually tell you that we don't actually know all the causes of ADHD. But some of the most common ones I see are things like parents who have strong ADHD symptoms, like low impulse control around food or any other substances, or even emotional instability, like getting angry really quickly. It's common that one of their kids has these symptoms too. And sometimes it's actually just how your child is born and developing. For example, George's parents, who recently completed the program, had done a brain scan from a young age and were able to actually see that his frontal lobes were actually lagging in development. And since the frontal lobes are what's responsible for controlling your impulses and your emotions, the doctor basically told George's parents from a young age that he might struggle with addictive substances his entire life, one of which is food. Now, the last cause of ADHD symptoms that I often see is if there's a lot of anxiety and pain in the child's early life, either coming from the parents or from an adverse childhood effect, which again causes too much emotions for your child's frontal lobes to manage, which makes impulse control around things like food even harder. Regardless of the cause of ADHD, children who have ADHD sometimes also have a deficit in dopamine in their brain, which, if you remember, is the neurotransmitter for motivation and reward, which is essentially the happy chemical in your brain. And their brain is constantly trying to make up for this by getting it from external sources. So if you can imagine in your brain, this is how much dopamine you need to be happy and content, and this is where you are when you have ADHD. And this gap is actually really uncomfortable. And I can tell you this personally. It makes you restless, it makes you agitated, and you're always trying to find things to fill up this gap in dopamine. This is part of the reason why children with ADHD often have scattered attention, because their brain is actually constantly trying to find what can make up for this gap, which is really uncomfortable. This is also why some people have addictive personalities around anything that gives dopamine, like alcohol or drugs. And by the way, ADHD medication, like Adderall, solves exactly this problem by filling up this gap with dopamine artificially, which is why when you take Adderall when you have ADHD, and I've taken it in the past and I can tell you this personally, it makes you feel normal again. But if you don't have this gap, if you take Adderall, you have too much stimulation and you become agitated and anxious. And so again, what can easily and consistently fill up this gap? Well, food. And because it's so easy to rely on food to fill up this gap from a young age, your child's brain actually starts rewiring the sensations of this discomfort for the actual feelings and sensations of hunger, which is why your child might be coming to you really convinced that they're hungry all the time, but it's just their brain playing a trick on them to get them to eat to make them feel good. And as a parent, you have to become really skilled to notice when their hunger is true hunger or when it's dopamine hunger. And what you have to do is actually help them redirect this dopamine hunger to other activities that give dopamine consistently, like playing something, socializing, doing something creative, getting physical touch, or even exercising. But again, since ADHD and its symptoms are unique for each child, and it takes a lot of trial and error to find something that works consistently, especially without medication, I highly recommend that you book a consultation so we can discuss your unique situation. Now, the fifth most common root cause of excess weight in childhood that I see is emotional eating. And usually the lines between whether your child has undiagnosed ADHD or is emotionally eating is blurred. Because if you remember, having too many strong emotions puts too much strain on your frontal lobes, which makes it harder for you to control your impulses when it comes to food and other things like technology or other addictive substances. And it's often the case that parents come to me saying that whenever their child is bored, stressed, or anxious, or even sometimes when they're happy, they want to eat. And I've seen cases where both emotional eating and ADHD were actually combined, such as in Bentley's case, who came to a point where he was eating raw pasta. And when their parents came to me, they had locked up all the food in the house because they just couldn't control Bentley's overeating. And if that story interests you, I highly recommend you go on my YouTube channel and watch their interview that I did after they finished the program and Bentley finally gained control of his emotional eating and ADHD symptoms and how he lost weight and gained back his self-confidence. And to be honest, emotional eating is also something I've dealt with personally. When I was growing up, there was a lot of emotional stress in the house. My parents were constantly fighting, sometimes even violently, and throwing plates at each other. We also had a lot of financial stress. We were immigrants and got into really bad debt, which eventually also led to my parents' divorce early in my life. And on top of that, I was constantly getting teased and bullied at school, and I was really self-conscious of being fat and I hated it. And sometimes the anxiety and stress is not even something that you're aware of. It comes from the people around you. For example, when I was born, my identical twin unfortunately passed at birth, and my mom lost her brother while I was in her womb. So essentially, while I was being created and in the early years of my life, my mom and dad had a lot of anxiety and grief. And children are usually really good at picking up on any emotion that parents have. And if you think about it, children actually come into this world with emotions being their first language. It's how they learn to communicate with parents to get what they need, whether it's by crying or anything else. And they also become really good at picking up on all the micro expression on the parent's face, even if they're trying to hide it. Because that's how they understand what's going on in the world and whether they're safe or not. And if a child sees that their parents are anxious, for example, they learn that the world isn't safe. Anxiety itself is actually an emotion that comes up when there's uncertainty in the world and in your brain. Whether it's financial uncertainty, relationship uncertainty, food uncertainty, and sometimes even life uncertainty. And this feeling of anxiety is really uncomfortable. And if you really pay attention, the emotion of anxiety actually has a purpose. And its purpose is to get you to do something about whatever is causing the anxiety so that you can reduce the uncertainty and feel safer. And if parents aren't able to deal with their anxiety well and don't teach their children how to deal with strong emotions like anxiety, or if they show them emotional coping skills that rely on substances like drugs, alcohol, or in our case, food, then children unfortunately learn to do the same. And in my case, my mom used food and my dad used alcohol to deal with the stress of life, so I learned to do the same from a young age. And you have to remember, our brain's primary job is to reduce pain and increase pleasure. And food is such a reliable and quick way to numb emotional pain and give you a momentary burst of pleasure, which is again the chemical in your brain called dopamine, that it can easily become addictive. And this is not to scare you, but it's really important for you as a parent to know. If your child learns from a young age to use food as an emotional coping mechanism, then their brain remembers this and will go back to it over and over until it finds something more reliable. And to really drive this point home, there's a classical psychological study where they put rats in a cage and essentially gave them a lever to press to get cocaine. So essentially they get the rats addicted to cocaine. And then they remove the cocaine and replace it with salt water. So the rats are no longer interested and stop pressing the lever. But then they wait several years in terms of human lifespan for the rat, and then they shock the rats. And what they see is that the rat immediately runs to the lever to get the cocaine, even if the lever doesn't give cocaine anymore. So what this shows us is that when the brain has created these pathways to remember where to get dopamine from reliably, it might never forget, and it might just be waiting for enough shock to make you go run after it. And to be honest, this is true even for me today. If I'm going through a period of stress or something painful happens in my life, my brain has decades of training to go to food to feel better. So I still feel that urge today when there's too much stress, and I have strategies set in place to prevent me from going to food as an emotional coping mechanism. All this to say, as a parent, you have to help protect your child and give them the tools and strategies that I'm sharing with you so that your child learns how to navigate the inevitable stressors of life as they grow older without relying on food. And at this point, you might be wondering, what should I actually be giving my child to eat to help them lose weight, especially if they're struggling with things like emotional eating or ADHD? And this is the sixth most common cause of excess weight in children. Parents just being overwhelmed and not knowing what healthy foods to give their kids. So my approach of food is based on balance, but differs a little bit from the traditional advice you might be hearing from a nutritionist or a dietitian, because I personally struggle with this, and I know that it's not just about eating more vegetables and eating less sugar. But first, before focusing on what foods to give, let's focus on what not to give. If you remember from the previous sections, your child's brain has potentially rewired their emotions or their dopamine-seeking sensations to hunger. And they're probably coming to you often for foods high in carbohydrates like bread and pasta, or salty and fatty or sugary snacks, which is exactly what gives you dopamine really quickly. So what you first want to do is make it as hard as possible for them to be able to access highly dopaminergic foods, so that they don't keep reinforcing these neural pathways in their brain. The first step is easy. You want to remove all processed foods and snacks from the house, so that there isn't an easy way for them to access it when their brain is seeking it. What this means is that anything that comes in a wrapper, in boxes, any snacks that are heavily processed, anything fried, anything with long ingredient lists, anything heavily refined like white bread, white pasta, and even white rice, you should avoid. These foods are stripped of their nutrients and fiber and are often low in protein and don't feed your child at all. And since they get absorbed really quickly in your stomach, they just give you a quick sugar spike and a quick dopamine hit, and often just make your child crave more and more and more. And at this point, I highly recommend you and every family I meet to go watch this documentary called What Are We Feeding Our Kids?, where a doctor surveyed what these kinds of food do on kids and actually experimented on himself eating highly processed foods for a month and saw how his brain wiring permanently changed just after 1 month. So imagine what this does to your kids after years and years of eating these kinds of food. So instead, you want to fill the house with foods that digest slowly, foods that don't give you an instant dopamine hit. And these are generally natural, whole foods like simple proteins from meats, complex carbohydrates, and fibrous foods like vegetables. And at this point, I have a lot of parents coming to me saying that, hey, should we actually cut all carbohydrates and go keto? Or should we go vegan? Or should we do any of these kinds of diets to help my child lose weight? And my answer is generally no. You want to avoid doing anything that isn't sustainable long term, because as soon as you stop any of these diets, all the weight comes rushing back. And I've done that mistake hundreds of times myself in my journey. Instead, you should simply focus on everyone in the family eating a balanced diet of real foods until they are full. And what is a balanced diet? The general rule of thumb I follow is that if you can imagine, each plate of food should be about 1/3 protein. So any meats that you like, eggs, egg whites, dairy like Greek yogurt, a third of it should be complex carbohydrates, things like brown rice, potatoes, quinoa, oatmeal, and a third of it should be fiber. So any vegetable that you like, and greens like kale, spinach, and lettuce. And you also want to have healthy fats in moderation for your cooking, or just the ones that are already in your proteins like meat and dairy. For breakfast, this might look like an egg and veggies omelette with quinoa as a side, a Greek yogurt bowl with frozen berries and hemp seeds, or simply a protein smoothie with spinach and your fruit of choice. For lunch and dinner, it might look like a roast chicken salad with brown rice, sweet potatoes and carrots air-fried with a steak, or just canned beans, broccoli, and homemade burger patties. And you'll quickly see that if your child is eating these kinds of food that don't give a lot of dopamine and until they are full, you won't even need to count their calories or their macros, and your child will receive much more reliable fullness signals and will be much less likely to go for food for dopamine instead of hunger. And you'll quickly notice that they actually eat a lot less naturally. And if you want more recipe ideas like these, I actually have a free cookbook that you can grab with the link in the description down below. Now, I'm not saying that you should never eat any treat or ice cream or dessert ever again. I'm just saying that you want to make it harder to access unhealthy foods by not having them in the house, and instead making the healthy options as easy as possible to access, especially if you can prepare them in advance so that your child can quickly grab them and heat them up. And if your child wants a treat like ice cream, you want to make it artificially harder to go get it by making it a sort of event where you have to walk outside, for example, for 30 minutes as a family to go get the ice cream. Or if you want cookies at home, have your child be involved in the process of making it from scratch every time and throw out the rest if there's any leftovers so that they can't be accessed easily later. And you'll see that by putting these kinds of barriers in front of treats, your child will actually want these treats far less because their brain does a simple calculation that the reward of dopamine is simply not worth the effort. And it just sees that it's much easier for them to grab healthy food anyway. Now, to be honest, whenever I present this way of eating to parents, I often hear that there's no way my child eats this way. My child is a picky eater and all they want is junk food and they crave it all the time, which is the 7th most common cause I see for excess weight in children. And most parents have a hard time believing me that these cravings can easily change within a month of joining the program and changing your diet and your consistency in providing healthy foods and not providing junk as an option, even if your child kicks and screams. And if you want proof of this, you should watch the testimonial with Tamara and her 12-year-old daughter Letitia, who recently completed the program, where after less than a month of eating healthy and natural foods, her daughter simply stopped asking for the processed and sugary foods. And the reason for this is twofold. The first one is one we already discussed, and it happens in the brain. Remember that your brain is optimized to get the most amount of pleasure, which if you remember is dopamine, with the least amount of effort. And junk food is one of the easiest way for your child to do this nowadays, and the only thing that competes with this is really their iPads and their phones. And what happens is when you eat a lot of these junk foods, which give you a lot of dopamine, something really interesting happens in the brain called dopamine receptor downregulation. Meaning that if your brain is constantly being flooded with a lot of dopamine from junk food, it actually starts closing some of its dopamine receptors or reduce the amount of dopamine they process because it just can't handle that much dopamine. But then, when you go eat something else like broccoli, which already doesn't give much dopamine, because your dopamine receptors have been downregulated, now you get even less pleasure from it and any other healthy food and any other activity, to be honest. So for kids who've been eating highly dopaminergic foods like chicken nuggets for a long time, eating healthy actually feels very unpleasurable because of this, and is one of the primary reasons that kids struggle with picky eating. So if you want your kids to start eating vegetables, you first have to remove access to options that are making it harder for them to enjoy healthy foods to begin with. And you'll see that after a few weeks, your child will start enjoying healthy options again gradually. And the second reason why picky eating and intense cravings for junk food usually happens actually starts in your gut. And if you didn't know, your gut can actually be up to 16 feet in length, and there's about 3 pounds of bacteria that live in your gut. And if you put them all together, they're actually the size of your brain, which is also roughly 3 pounds as an adult. And this bacteria, because they coexist with us, they actually help you break down the food by eating some of it themselves. And the food that feeds your gut keeps alive a certain type of bacteria that love the specific type of food that you give them. So to make it simple, if you eat a lot of sugar or highly processed foods, the bacteria that live in your gut are the ones who love those kinds of foods. And because these bacteria need to stay alive just like you do, if you stop eating these foods that they love, they also start dying. And to keep themselves alive, they actually send signals to your brain through your vagus nerve to get more of these kinds of food for them. And this is what often causes cravings for sugary and highly processed snacks like chips, pizza, or chicken nuggets. So we actually often think that food preferences start in the brain, but every single person who goes through the Step Together program, whether it's an adult or a child, is surprised to see that after a month they stop eating junk food completely. And instead they actually start craving healthy foods and salads and things that are high in fiber, because now their gut is filled with these kinds of bacteria that love those specific kinds of foods. Now, the next common cause of excess weight in children that I see is children having too much screen time. As a parent these days, you probably struggle a lot with your child wanting to use technology all the time, whether it's watching YouTube, playing Roblox or Minecraft, or watching TV. There are 3 important reasons why you want to help reduce your child's screen time if this is the case. The first one is really obvious. If your child is always using screens, they're usually inactive and don't have the chance to be bored to go do something physical like playing outdoors or even going for a walk. Everything is boring when compared to screens. The second point is, if your child is eating while watching screens, then you should help them stop this habit immediately. And you should model it for them by not eating while being on your phone, watching TV, or working either. The reason for this is simple. When you're eating while distracted, it's much more likely that you overeat because you're no longer paying attention to your hunger signals. And the fascinating thing that happens with every family that I work with that has this problem is that they quickly notice that if their child is not allowed to be watching while eating, they quickly get bored from food and they actually eat much less than before and ask to leave the table so that they can continue their game time. And the third and last reason is probably the most important and surprising one. Using screens makes eating healthy food harder to enjoy. So if you remember the chemical in your brain called dopamine from previous sections, the one responsible for making you feel happy when you eat chocolate and motivated to go get more chocolate, then it should be obvious that screens also give you an abundance of dopamine with very little effort, and especially with highly dopaminergic apps like YouTube Shorts, TikTok, or even games like Roblox. These are really easy ways for your child to get a lot of dopamine. And just like we saw with junk food, if your child is getting a lot of cheap dopamine from tech, then the dopamine receptors in their brain start down-regulating and actually closing off because it starts becoming overwhelming getting all that dopamine. And what this results in is that things that don't give much dopamine become really boring. And what doesn't give much dopamine? Of course, it's healthy foods like proteins, veggies, and complex carbohydrates. And this is a link that most people and even psychiatrists often don't know. Spending hours scrolling on your phone has a direct link with why your child doesn't want to eat healthy. So what you should do is simple. First is you want to limit tech usage to 1 to 2 hours a day and preferably late at night. Then you want to download an app that I really love and I recommend to every family called Screen Zen if you have an iPhone or an iPad. This app makes it so that you have to wait about 60 seconds before going on your phone and mindlessly scrolling. And it kicks you out of these after about 5 minutes of usage to add more friction into the process and make them less addictive. And if you remember, just like with junk food, all you want to do is add more effort before any activity that give a high spike of dopamine to make them less addictive. And this might surprise you also, but before I was doing this, I was actually building video games for the Oculus VR headsets. So I'm not against tech and games at all. I just know personally how addictive they are and how the people who are building these things know exactly how to get your child hooked by tricking their psychology and their dopamine levels. So the last thing I really recommend you to do is that use tech and especially these kinds of cheap forms of dopamine as a reward after completing an activity that is hard. Whether it's washing dishes, doing homework, or any other thing that makes it so that they can't access this with zero effort. And preferably you want to do this later in the day so that they don't fry their brain early in the day and that they actually can do the things that they need to do. The next common cause of excess weight is something that actually most parents miss. And this is having poor sleeping habits and not getting enough high quality sleep. And this is something unfortunately I see all the time because recent stats show that up to 80% of teens are sleep deprived, meaning that they don't get the 8 to 10 hours of sleep that they need every night. And if you're anything like me and most people I know, A night of poor sleep leads to a lot of difficulty doing anything the next day, especially when it comes to getting enough physical movement and making the right food choices. And in fact, when you're tired, the frontal lobes of your brain, remember the same thing that contributes to ADHD and is responsible for decision making and impulse control. When you don't sleep enough, this part becomes faulty, which is why it becomes really hard to say no to junk food. Interestingly enough, this is also why it becomes harder to say no to food later at night, because the frontal lobes start winding down and your cravings and your impulses and especially your emotions become more overwhelming, which is usually why overeating episodes and binging episodes happen later at night. Also, because your brain uses primarily glucose for energy, a tired brain keeps screaming for sugar all day, which is why it makes it even harder to say no to that sugary muffin or sugary coffee in the morning. So it's really important for both you and your child to sleep well and enough, and not having enough sleep actually leads to having more of the hunger hormone called ghrelin in your blood and less of the satiety hormone called leptin. So it's not just psychological, the hormones that contribute to your hunger actually get worse when you don't sleep enough. So what can you do to make sure that everyone in your family gets high quality sleep? And I highly recommend that you do all of these as a family so that it actually becomes routine in your household. Again, remember that children don't do as you say, they do as you do. The first one is that you want to sleep consistently at the same time every night, within plus or minus 15 minutes, so that your body's internal clock stabilizes and it knows when it's time to go to sleep and when it's time to wake up. The second one is you want to use screens or harsh bright lights 1 to 2 hours before sleep. The light from your screens and LED lights actually imitates the sun and tricks your brain to think that it's the day, and it actually hinders the production of the sleep hormone called melatonin, which leads you to having difficulty falling asleep and also getting less high quality sleep. The third one is don't use any alarms. If you need to wake up with an alarm, it's a clear sign that you're not sleeping enough. So you should actually sleep earlier in the night. The fourth one is you want to stop eating about 3 hours before bedtime. When you have a lot of food in your stomach, your energy goes to digestion instead of being used to repair your body during sleep, and it actually makes your sleep much less efficient. Even if you feel like eating a carb-heavy meal or a fatty meal before sleep makes you fall asleep faster and more deeply. Now, the next common cause of excess weight that I see in children is that parents often tell me that they just can't afford healthy food. So it's true that highly processed foods and junk food can be cheaper than healthy food on average. Actually, one of the main reasons why food is processed is to make it shelf stable so that it can last longer on grocery shelves, and this helps companies sell it for cheaper eventually. And myself, when I was growing up, we were immigrants who were relatively poor, and my parents had to redo their education, and we fell into really bad debt. So my mom also struggled with finances, and she often packed my lunch with highly processed bread and processed meats. And one of the lunches that I remember the most is those cheap hot dog buns packed with those highly processed plastic looking hot dogs, or just really white sliced bread with ham and cheese. And since these foods are delicious and addictive, I didn't mind it and just kept asking more and more of it. But looking back, I really wish my mom hadn't done that. That she had realized that even though we had no money and couldn't afford healthier food, the cost that I paid growing up obese, all the years of suffering with excess weight and low self-esteem, and all the money we wasted trying all these different weight loss programs ended up actually being much more than the savings on the cheaper food. And I also want to show you that you can eat better even though you don't have much money. In fact, Tamara with her 12-year-old Letitia did the whole program where they were actually on government food programs. But instead of eating the processed foods like cereal and white bread that they were given, they focused on eating beans and whole wheat pasta and a lot more veggies and any cheap protein like chicken and ground beef that they could get their hand on. And I actually want to show you that you can really eat healthy without it being that expensive. And in fact, an entire family of 4 can eat for less than $150 a week of groceries, which comes down to less than $5 a day per person. And this is an example of a grocery cart at Costco online that I did for you, which is following the guidelines for food that we discussed earlier in this video. So for your proteins, you can get eggs, chicken thighs, and ground beef. And for your fiber, you can get green beans in a can, romaine lettuce, and bananas. And for complex carbohydrates, you can get rolled oats, brown rice, and black beans. And all of this comes down to only $137 when buying online before tax. And if you go in store, it's actually even cheaper and comes to less than $140 after tax. But of course, this doesn't include spices and sauces and olive oil, but those should add a minimal cost on top of this. And if we're honest with ourselves, most people spend more than this on fast food and highly processed food alone every week on top of their normal groceries. And I'm not saying that you have to eat the same list over and over. You can always swap the proteins, you can swap the carbs, you can swap the veggies every week for variety. But this should show you that eating healthy doesn't have to be that expensive. Now that we saw that eating healthy doesn't have to be expensive, what I often hear from parents is that they just don't have time to cook healthy food, which is why they get processed foods and fast foods or go to restaurants, often out of convenience. Trust me, I really understand. Most parents who are doing the Step Together program or have finished it are either single parents, they're either running a business or running a large family, or sometimes even all of them at the same time. And to be honest, I don't have much time to cook either. I work practically 24/7 to help families like yours, so there's a lot of strategies that I've had to pick up myself. So to help with this, we first have to dissect the problem. Is it really true that you don't have the time? Or is it simply not a priority over the other things in your life? And this is not to judge. I see it as my role to motivate your family to make taking care of your family's health the number one priority. And that starts with actively making more time for cooking and shopping, which means actively taking time away from other things in your life. So in the Step Together program, I help you do an audit of how you spend your time and if there's anything in your day that you can restructure or deprioritize to make more time for healthy eating and cooking. What this could mean is that you might actually have to spend less time at work to be able to make time for cooking. But most of the time, what we often find is that there's a lot of time wasted mindlessly on the phone, watching TV, or any activity that doesn't actually give you much, and we can slowly start replacing those with activities that prioritize your family's health. And also, what we often see is that as you start taking better care of your own health, like sleeping better, eating better, and doing more exercise, you suddenly have more energy during the day to actually cook. And also, what we often do is strategize how we can actually do more with less time. For example, can you order your groceries online, like the example I showed previously, instead of spending the 3 hours shopping yourself? Sure, you have to pay a little more to get it delivered, but if it gives you back the time to be able to cook instead of eating junk food that is even more expensive, it's actually really worth it. Can you also batch cook your meals, for example, on a Sunday, such as grilling all your meats, cooking your rice and potatoes, cutting your veggies and salads, so that when it comes time to eat during the week, everyone in the family can quickly make themselves a plate of different options of proteins, complex carbs, and veggies that are really ready, and you're just assembling and putting it in the microwave to heat? Or can you actually make cooking a family activity and get the kids involved to both spend time together as a family and also split the responsibilities so that it's done faster? Or if you really can't cook, can you afford to order healthier food delivery options that are often sometimes even cheaper than fast food? Or have healthy fast food options like a bowl of brown rice, meats, and veggies at Chipotle when you really don't have time to prepare food? Trust me, there's almost always a healthier option, even at places like McDonald's, if you really need it. And it's true that each family's situation is unique, but so far there hasn't been a single family in the Step Together program that hasn't been able to make more time to cook or just choose better options when there is truly no time. And I'm sure that you can do it as well. Okay, so we're getting close to the end, and really thank you so much for spending so much time trying to understand how you can help your child. So the 12th reason why I see children having difficulty with excess weight is often because there's not enough physical activity. So you're probably surprised and wondering why I'm bringing it up so late into this video. And in fact, one of the first things that parents tell me when they come to talk to me is that they think that their child just needs to do more activity. But I often tell them that they actually seem to be doing enough already. They're often either in one sport, or they're getting enough activity at school, or they're just walking enough throughout the day. And that sometimes they're actually even doing too much, and they see that they're risking burnout. And I'm not saying that your child shouldn't do any physical activity. What I'm saying is you can simply never outrun a bad diet or mental health challenges that contribute to excess eating. The truth is, you have to run about 10 minutes non-stop to compensate for just one Oreo or even one banana. So it's a lot easier to consume calories than it is to burn it. And what often happens is, a lot of parents focus so much on exercise and don't realize that it's actually making their child eat even more than they burn, because by doing the exercise, they actually naturally get hungrier. But if they're eating the wrong foods, it's so much easier for them to eat more than they burned. So instead of focusing on exercise, what you have to do is help your child with their nutrition and emotional challenges first, so that their body can naturally stabilize their true hunger signals at whatever amount of exercise that they're doing. So for example, if they're about to start summer, which is a season where they do a lot of sports, they'll naturally eat more. And if they're doing less sports during winter, they naturally eat less. This natural balance is where you want to land. But yes, you should absolutely help your child exercise regardless, not just for weight loss, but for all the other benefits that it gives. such as socialization, strength, longevity, and even mental health benefits. But instead of focusing on the weight loss aspect of it, try to help them find an activity that they truly enjoy and that really feels like play to them, whether it's tennis, martial arts, running, basketball, or anything in between. And if they like it, you should actually play with them so that you're doing it as a family and again, you're modeling it for them. And don't give up after trying a few sports. Some kids are naturally social, so they'll actually enjoy team sports like soccer, basketball, volleyball, while other kids like me always hated team sports and was much more into solo sports like running, jiu-jitsu, and weightlifting, and even tennis. So try a variety of sports to see where your child naturally lands and what truly feels like play to them. And never focus on having to do it just because they're trying to lose weight. And if you're a parent looking for specialized programs to help your child become stronger, faster, and have more mobility, I actually have a certification in youth fitness from the National Academy of Sport Medicine and can help you create the right program for them. And we finally made it to the last cause of excess weight in children, which is actually the most important one and the primary reason why I've created this company called Step Together to begin with. The truth is, most parents who come to me already know what leads to a healthier life for themselves and their kids. Maybe not to the level of detail that I explained in this video, but even the little bit that they do know, they're unfortunately not able to apply themselves because it's honestly hard to focus on this one problem consistently and convey all of these to their children and dealing with all the challenges that that brings while you have all the other things going on at home and at work. And to be honest with you, ever since I was 7 years old, I knew that I should be eating better and moving more. And my mom knew that too. She even has a PhD in public health. So the question is, why couldn't she help me despite everything that she knew? And why is it likely that despite all the information that I give you and the countless parents that come to me during the consultations, why is it so rare that parents are actually able to apply these to see positive change for their kid? The answer is unfortunately pretty simple. Because the habits that lead to poor health have taken years to develop, and they've created strong neural connections in your brain that make them last and make them so easy to fall back into. That's why it's so hard to undo all of these habits, both for you and your child. And most people simply aren't able to make the difficult changes that I've explained in this video for long enough without some form of daily structure, accountability, and education, with the right type of positive reinforcement and the true understanding and science behind behavior change for adults and children. And that's exactly why I created Step Together, to help parents like you help their child make the changes that are required in the brain as fast and efficiently as possible in a period of 4 months, instead of taking the decades of painful trial and error that it took me and my family, let alone the tens of thousands of dollars wasted on all the short-term programs that never worked. So if you're ready to help your child overcome this challenge for good and give them the childhood that they truly deserve, and think that Step Together could help you do that, then I invite you to book a consultation personally with me by going on our website and pressing the Start Today button. And the link to the website is going to be the first link in the description of this YouTube video. And if you want to keep learning about all the ways you can help your child with their excess weight issues, I highly recommend that you subscribe to this YouTube channel because I'll be posting more and more videos on this topic alone. This was Kamil. Thank you for watching this video.